Hello, today we're going to be looking at the new cards which have been released within Power of the Elements. This is the finalized spoiler and confirms all of their names. Elemental Hero Spirit of Neos is a level 7 light attribute warrior type effect monster with 2500 attack and 2000 defense. You can use each effect among the first, second and third with this card's name only once per turn. 1. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can special summon this card from your hand in defense position, and if you do, it cannot be destroyed by battle. 2. If this card is special summoned, you can add one spell or trap card that mentions an elemental hero monster's name or one polymerization from your deck to your hand. And 3. During your main phase, you can shuffle this card into the deck, and if you do, special summon one elemental hero normal monster from your deck. This is an advanced version of the original elemental hero Neos. It has the same stat line, same attributes, same typing, everything alongside that aspect, as suppose this is an effect monster version. The first effect simply lets you special summon this card. It might have to be in defense position, but it does have that protection from being destroyed by battle, and it's just whenever your opponent actually declares an attack. That attack doesn't have to go through successfully, it just has to be the declaration of the attack. The second ability, when this is special summon, for example through the first effect, you're just able to search for any elemental hero monster's name that happens to be a spell or trap card, so you've got so many of those. You've got some of the weaker ones such as Feather Shot, which is a counter trap card used by elemental hero Avian, but you've got some more advanced ones such as Hero Mask. Alternatively, you can go for a polymerization, so it's just another way of getting to your fusion cards. The third effect, just in your main phase, by shuffling this card, you get to summon an elemental hero normal monster. Typically, this will just be replacing itself for an elemental hero Neos, so you can then contact views. It just makes the deck more synergized and prevents you from having to run stupid cards such as Fake Hero, which was a very old way of getting out elemental hero Neos. Crosskeeper is a level 2 dark attribute warrior type effect monster with 400 attack and defense. You can only use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. You can send this card from your hand or field to the graveyard, special summon one elemental hero or Neospatian monster from your hand or graveyard, but its effects are negated if summoned from the graveyard. And 2. If you special summon an elemental hero fusion monster while this card is in your graveyard, you can banish this card, draw 2 cards, then place 1 card from your hand on the bottom of the deck. Both of these effects are quite useful, and it's an upgrade to a previous monster with a similar type of name. The first effect lets you get rid of this card to bring out either an elemental hero or Neospatian, so you can go for your Neos, or if you've got Neos on the field, you can go for the Neospatian to help you go into your contact fused monster. This means you're having to run less of the janky style of cards, which would typically damage your deck and reduce your ability to draw into anything decent. The second ability happens to be if an elemental hero monster is special summoned, so it can either be by fusion summon itself or actually special summon from the graveyard. You're able to just draw 2 cards and then place 1 from the hand to the bottom of the deck. Think of this like a mini version of Magical Mallet. You get to draw into potentially better cards, get rid of one of your weaker cards, and that just furthers your card advantage. Splite Blue is part of a different archetype known as the Splites. They're quite decent. They're dark attribute thunder types, all of them. They're level 2. It's an effect monster with 1100 attack and 1000 defense. You can only special summon once per turn using the procedure written in the first effect with this card's name. You can only use the second effect with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If you control a level or rank 2 monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. 2. If this card is special summoned, you can add one Splite monster from your deck to your hand, except Splite Blue. The purpose of this card is it just instantly lets you special summon it. It helps you to get that level of advantage and field presence. Second ability is what makes it unique. It acts like a rotor for the deck. It helps you to just search for whatever Splite monster you need at the time. Splite Jet is a level 2 dark attribute thunder type effect monster with 1300 attack and 700 defense. You can only special summon once per turn using the procedure written in the first effect with this card's name. You can only use the second effect with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If you control a level or rank 2 monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. And 2. If this card is special summoned, you can add one Splite spell or trap card from your deck to your hand. Similar to the previous version, Splite Blue, this has the ability to search instead of a monster for one of your spell or trap cards within the archetype. So they both synergize quite well together. First effect is the same as most of the others, they just are able to spam the board more quickly. Splite Pixies is a level 2 Dark Attribute Thunder type effect monster with 1400 attack and defense. You can only special summon once per turn using the procedure written in the first effect with this card's name. You can use the second effect with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If you control a level or rank 2 monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. And 2. If your other level, rank or link 2 monster battles an opponent's monster during damage calculation, as a quick effect, you can send this card from your hand or field to the graveyard. Your battling monster gains attack and defense equal to that opponent's monster's current attack until the end of this turn. I love this card. Out of the archetype, it's my personal favourite, and it acts like an honest for the deck. It's perfect for what it needs. Most of the Splite monsters are quite weak, even the link and the rank 2 monsters, and so by doing this, you're guaranteeing to get over your opponent's monsters. It also comes with the advantage that your opponent might not know you have this in your hand. Since it triggers and activates from there, that means your opponent is going to take a lot of damage, and it also means that they're going to lose some of their precious monsters. Splite Red is a level 2 Fire Attribute Thunder type effect monster with 1200 attack and 1800 defense. You can only special summon once per turn using the procedure written in the first effect with this card's name. You can use the second effect with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If you control a level or link 2 monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. And 2. When your opponent activates a monster effect, as a quick effect, you contribute one other level, rank or link 2 monster, negate that effect. Then if you attributed a rank or link 2 monster, you can destroy that monster. This just acts like a bit of a solemn judgment, so it stops your opponent from being able to use their monster effects, and you get the bonus of if you happen to have attributed one of your link or rank monsters, you can then destroy it on top of that. It's decent. Splite Carrot is a level 2 Fire Attribute Thunder type effect monster with 1000 attack and 1900 defense. You can only special summon it once per turn using the procedure written in the first effect with this card's name. You can only use the second effect with this card's name once per turn. 1. If you control a level or link 2 monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. And 2. When your opponent activates a spell, trap, or effect, as a quick effect, you contribute one other level, rank, or link 2 monster, negate that effect. Then, if you attributed a rank or link 2 monster, you can destroy that card. You can think of this as a better version of the previous monster, whereas that could only really go after monster effects. This can go after absolutely anything. You also get the benefit of, if you tribute over one of your rank or link monsters, to destroy the card. Depending on the situation, that might matter or it might not. If it's against a continuous spell or trap card, or a monster that stays on the field, the destruction effect is necessary. If it's a normal spell or trap card, which will just go to the graveyard anyway, then simply negating it is a decent enough effect. It's going to stop it from being activated. Therian Empress Alasia is a level 8 Earth Attribute Reptile type effect monster with 2100 attack and 2500 defense. You can only use each effect among the first and second with this card's name once per turn. 1. You can target one Therian or reptile monster in your graveyard, special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, equip that target to this card. 2. You can discard one card, then target one Therian monster card in your spell or trap zone, special summon it. And 3. A Therian's monster equipped with this card gains 700 attack and the second effect with this card's name. So the purpose of this card is it's just able to special summon itself and a different monster and then become an equip card. In doing so, it gives that monster another 700 attack points. It also means that you're able to special summon your Therian monsters from your spell and trap zone. It's a bit like having the Crystal Beasts, but as a reptile version. Therian Irregular is a level 10 Dark Attribute Machine type effect monster with 1600 attack and 2800 defense. You can only use each effect among the first, second, and third with this card's name once per turn. 1. You can target up to 3 Therian monsters in your graveyard, special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, equip those targets to this card. 2. You can discard one Endless Engine Yugioh system, destroy all cards your opponent controls. And 3. While this card is equipped to a monster, you can special summon it, then equip to this card the monster it was equipped to. So the purpose of this card is it's able to just mass equip Therian monsters to it. Each of those will have different effects depending, and will give this card some sort of advantage. Second effect is actually where the decency comes in. By discarding a specific card, you're just able to board wipe your opponent's cards. Unless those are able to protect themselves by their own effects, they lose pretty much everything at the cost of one of your own cards. And the third effect just lets you special summon a monster and then equip various cards to it. That's just changing where the equip cards are going to, and each of those will give certain types of advantage. Ice Jade Creation Agacasis is a level 7 water attribute aqua type tuner effect monster with 2000 attack and defense. You can only use each effect among the first and third effects with this card's name per turn, and only once that turn. 1. If this card is in your hand or graveyard. As a quick effect, you can target one Ice Jade monster you control. Equip this card to that target. 2. A monster equipped with this card gains 400 attack and defense for each banished monster. And 3. While this card is equipped to a monster, you can special summon this card. This is a quite powerful tuner monster, considering that it's level 7, it's one of the high ones. The first effect just lets you equip this to any of your Ice Jade monsters, and it's nice that it can activate either from the hand or from the graveyard. So if you've used this previously, you don't have to run things to recover this back to the hand. Secondary effect, if you happen to have banished lots of monsters, and this is both yours and your opponent's banished monsters, those cards will gain 400 attack and defense. So if you think of this like Grenmaju Daiza, how quickly that can get lots of attack points, this grants that type of effect to those Ice Jade monsters. And thirdly, you have the option of special summon this card if it happens to be equipped to one of your other monsters. That's perfectly fine if you're looking for a synchro play in future turns and to set up a stronger board. Ashen of Albaz is a level 4 dark attribute dragon type effect monster with 1800 attack and 0 defense. You can only use the third effect of this card's name once per turn. 1. This card's name becomes Ornan of Albaz while on the field or in the graveyard. 2. While a level 8 fusion monster is in your graveyard, this card gains 200 attack for each monster in your graveyard. Also, your opponent cannot target other monsters you control with card effects. And 3. If a monster you control leaves the field by an opponent's card effect, while both this card and a fusion monster are in your graveyard, you can special summon this card. The first effect just treats it as Ornan of Albaz. It's used as part of the fusions for many of those types of monsters, so it's kind of necessary to have that style of name attached to it. Secondary ability lets this card gain 200 attack points for each monster in your graveyard, and it also forces all of your opponent's monsters' effects to target this card before going after your others. And the third effect, simply if this is destroyed, if a monster leaves the field by a card effect, you're able to then bring this back, so you're having some consistency. It also doesn't have the disadvantage of other reoccurring cards, which often once they've reoccurred from the graveyard back to the field, if they've destroyed or removed from the field again, they have to go and get banished. Tier Element's Marrow is a level 2 dark attribute aqua type effect monster with 800 attack and 2000 defense. You can use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. 2. If this card is sent to the grave by card effect, you can fusion summon one fusion monster from your extra deck by placing fusion materials mentioned on it from your hand, field and or graveyard to the bottom of the deck in any order, including this card in the graveyard. So the purpose of the first effect is you're just sending the 3 cards from the deck to the graveyard, and the tier elements work on being sent to the graveyard by card effects, so each of them will help to trigger off others' effects. This one just lets you go into your instant fusion by fusing from the hand, field and or graveyard, and instead of those cards being banished, they go to the bottom of the deck. This can be argued to be more difficult because to reoccur them, you're going to have to search for them again. The counter argument to that is that actually, as your deck has to be sent to the graveyard to use its effects with the first one, you're constantly deck thinning, and at some point you will get to those cards. Tier elements have Finesse is a level 3 dark attribute aqua type effect monster with 1600 attack and 1000 defense. You can only use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. When your opponent activates a monster effect on the field. As a quick effect, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. 2. If this card is sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can fusion summon one fusion monster from your extra deck by placing fusion materials mentioned on it from your hand, field and or graveyard to the bottom of the deck in any order, including this card in the graveyard. So this one triggers in response to one of your opponent's monsters effects to send the top 3 cards of the deck to the graveyard, and it happens to be the secondary ability to let you fusion summon as well. This can help to trigger off during your opponent's turn, but it does come at the disadvantage that you are going to be deck thinning a bit too quickly. Think of it a bit like Light Swans. There is that kind of magic number that you get to where you get into the specific cards that you need, but if you go too far beyond that, you will start deck thinning yourself to the point where you might go to deck out. Tier Element's Siren is a level 4 dark Dark Attribute Aqua-type effect monster with 1800 attack and 1300 defense. You can use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. During your main phase, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, send one monster from your hand to the graveyard. Then send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. 2. If this card is sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can fusion summon one fusion monster from your extra deck by placing fusion materials mentioned on it from your hand, field and or graveyard on the bottom of the deck in any order, including this card in your graveyard. Similar to the other ones, the secondary ability just helps you to fusion summon if this goes to the graveyard by a card effect. The first effect lets you just instantly special summon this card by sending a different monster from the hand to the graveyard. That can help to trigger off other monsters' secondary abilities, considering that you're going to be sending those to the graveyard instead, so you could be able to fuse into multiple monsters within that turn. Tier Element Rhino Heart is a level 4 water attribute warrior type effect monster with 1500 attack and 2100 defense. You can only use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can send one Tier Elements monster from your deck to the graveyard, except Tier Elements Rhino Heart. 2. If this card is sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can special summon it, but banish it when it leaves the field, and if you do, send one Tier Elements monster from your hand to the graveyard. This one has a different style of effect in that the first one just lets you send a Tier Elements from the deck to the graveyard. That will also help to trigger off their effects. Secondary ability means that you can actually reoccur this card, but at the point of costing you with a Foolish Burial style of effect to send another monster, which is a Tier Element, from the hand to the graveyard. It's not a disadvantage, considering each of those will have an effect which combines the archetype together. Vernalizer, Fairy of Hills and Blossoms, is a level 4 Earth Attribute Fairy type effect monster with 200 attack and 2000 defense. You can only use the first effect with this card's name once per turn. 1. You can discard this card and one other monster or Vernalizer Fairy card. You cannot activate monster effects for the rest of this turn except Earth monsters. Also add one Vernalizer Fairy card from your deck to your hand, except Vernalizer Fairy of Hills and Blooms. Then you can special summon one Earth attribute monster from your graveyard. 2. Vernalizer Fairy monsters you control cannot be destroyed by card effects. The point of this archetype is that it has interactions between the Earth attribute in general alongside its specific archetype. By using its effect, you're able to rotate any of your Vernalizer Fairy monsters, and you're also getting the additional bonus by reviving an Earth attribute monster. Since the Vernalizers are all Earth attribute themselves, this means you can just specifically go for these targets. Alternatively, if you are mixing in Earth attribute monsters, there are quite a few powerful ones with decent effects that you could benefit from. The secondary ability prevents your Vernalizer monsters from being destroyed by card effects. It's a decent effect, but the problem is, with its stat lineup, it's not going to last on the field to benefit your monsters that often. Vernalizer Fairy of Forest and Awakening is a level 2 Earth attribute Fairy type effect monster with 900 attack and 1800 defense. You can use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. You can discard this card and one other monster or Vernalizer Fairy card. You cannot activate monster effects for the rest of this turn except Earth monsters. Also send from your deck to the graveyard one Earth monster that can be normal summoned or set. Then you can special summon one Earth monster with a different name from your graveyard. Second ability is you can target one Vernalizer Fairy monster you control. Its current attack becomes doubled until the end of this turn. With the first effect, it simply lets you discard this card an additional one to Foolish Burial a different monster, which is an Earth attribute. You do get the benefit of reviving a different monster, but I would argue that you do have quite a lot of discards in this. Secondary effect, depending on the type of the Vernalizer monster, doubling the attack points could be decent, but in this case, for this example, if you were to target this, it only becomes a 1800 attack monster. Decent for a level 2, but for most threats, it's not enough to get over them. Vernalizer Fairy of Flowers and Fields is a level 3 Earth attribute Fairy type effect monster with 600 attack and 1600 defense. You can use the first effect with this card's name only once per turn. 1. You can discard this card and one other monster or Vernalizer Fairy card. You cannot activate monster effects for the rest of this turn except Earth monsters. Also add one Earth monster from your graveyard to your hand, except Vernalizer Fairy of Flowers and Fields. Then you can special summon one Earth monster from your graveyard. 2. Your opponent cannot target Vernalizer Fairy monsters you control with card effects. The first effect lets you just add an Earth monster from your graveyard to the hand. hand, and special summon a different Earth attribute monster. This provides you with a certain level of card advantage both on your field and gives you replenishment to the hand. The secondary ability, actually, if combined with the one that prevents your monsters from being destroyed by card effects, means you have more protection overall for those Vernalizer fairy monsters. Vernalizer, Fairy of Mountains and Melting Snow, is a level 3 Earth attribute fairy type effect monster with 1100 attack and 0 defense. You can use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. You can discard this card and one other monster or Vernalizer fairy card. You cannot activate monster effects for the rest of this turn, except Earth monsters. Also, draw one card. Then you can special summon one Earth monster from your graveyard. 2. You can target one Vernalizer fairy monster you control. It can make a second attack during each battle phase this turn. The first effect of this, by discarding this and an additional monster to just get an additional draw, it's fine depending on where you're getting the cards and what you're trying to draw into. If you can dig into your deck and you get into something decent, that's fine. It also provides you with the advantage of reviving an Earth attribute monster. Secondary ability, giving your Vernalizer monsters an additional attack might be okay if it can clinch the duel. If not, I don't think they're of the attack stats necessary to finish off your opponent. Gemini Quartz is a level 4 Earth attribute fairy type effect monster with 1500 attack and defense. You can use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If your opponent controls a monster, you can special summon this card. Set one fusion continuous spell directly from your deck. Also, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of this turn except Gemini monsters. 2. If this card is used as material for a fusion summon and sent to the graveyard or banished, you can add one Gemini monster from your graveyard to your hand except Gemini Quartz. The purpose of this card is you're able to just discard this and you can get your Brilliant Fusion, which lets you go into Lady Brilliant Diamond. It does come at the cost of making your monster's attack points 0, but with that effect, with Lady Brilliant Diamond, you can then tribute one of your Gemini monsters to then summon one of your fusion monsters from the extra deck at no additional costs, so you are developing that additional advantage. Secondary ability, if this is just used as part of a fusion, you're able to recover one of your Gemini monsters, be it if it's used as like a Miracle for Fusion style of effect, or if this has just been fused by Gemini Fusion. Brilliant Rose is a level 2 light attribute rock type effect monster with 500 attack and defense. This card is always treated as a Gemnite card. You can only use the first effect with this card's name once per turn. 1. You can discard one Gemnite or Melodious card, special summon this card from your hand. And 2. Once per turn, you can send one Gemnite or Melodious monster from your extra deck to the graveyard. This card's name, type, and attribute become that sent monster's original name, type, and attribute until the end phase. I think this card is quite decent because just by discarding those cards, you're able to instantly special summon this card, and also you're able to treat this as the specific name, type, and attribute. Many of the Gemnites and Melodious require set specific monsters as part of their fusion materials. There are a couple of generic ones, for example, Lady Brilliant Diamond. There's a normal one with 2,900 attack points, and even the other fusion monster doesn't require them. However, things like Gemnite Ruby require Garnet as one of the materials, so this provides you with that additional flexibility. It's like a fusion substitute style of effect. Melfi Wallaby is a level 2 Earth attribute beast type effect monster with 0 attack and 400 defense. You can only use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If your opponent normal or special summons a monster, or when this card is targeted for an attack by an opponent's monster, you can return this card to the hand. Then you can special summon 2 Melfi monsters, different names from each other from your deck, except Melfi Wallaby. 2. During your end phase, you can special summon this card from your hand. This is a nuisance of a card, and many people really find the archetype quite annoying. I personally do so as well. The effect just simply, if your opponent does anything, whether that's normal or special summons a monster, or declares an attack, you're instantly able to just send this back to the hand, special summon 2 cards from the deck with various other effects that they have, and therefore you instantly have that card advantage. Secondary ability simply just lets you special summon this card from your hand, so you're constantly getting that hand advantage being transformed into field advantage. Melfi Sealy is a level 2 water attribute beast type tuner effect monster with 300 attack and 100 defense. You can use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If a face-up beast monster you control other than Melfi Sealy was returned to the hand this turn, as a quick effect, you can special summon this card from your hand. Then immediately after this effect resolves, you can synchro summon using only this card and Melfi monsters in your hand as material. 2. During your end phase, if this card is in your graveyard, you can target one beast Xyz monster you control, attach this card to it as material. So this provides a tuner for the archetype. The first effect just lets you special summon this card and then lets you go instantly into a synchro summon. It's very useful because this can activate during yours or your opponent's turn. Depending on what you synchro into, can disrupt your opponent, and sometimes it can be more effective if triggered on your opponent's turn. Secondary effect just lets this be used as part of an Xyz material. That's fine if your other monsters have used up their materials, because most Xyz monsters don't tend to have any effects after they've lost all their materials. There are some exceptions, but I think because they're beasts, they're very specific and do need this type of support. Scar Vendred is a level 6 dark attribute zombie type effect monster with 2300 attack and 0 defense. You can only use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can add one Vendred spell or trap card from your deck to your hand. 2. If a monster on the field is tributed while this card is in your graveyard, you can banish one other zombie monster from your graveyard, special summon this card, and if you do, you cannot special summon monsters while you control this monster except Vendred monsters. This is a decent level 6 zombie monster for the Vendred archetype. First effect, by having this card sent to the graveyard, remember this can be used as part of a ritual summon. That's how the archetype likes to work. You're just able to search for any of your Vendred spell or trap cards from the deck to the hand. Secondary ability, if a different monster is tributed, remember that also applies with ritual summoning, you can just bring this card back to the field at the cost of banishing one of your other zombie monsters. Exo-Sister Malfa is a level 4 light attribute spellcaster type effect monster with 1600 attack and 800 defense. You can only use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If you control no monsters or all monsters you control are Xyz monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, special summon one Exo-Sister Ellis from your deck. You cannot special summon monsters the turn you activate this effect, except Exo-Sister monsters. 2. If a card is moved out of either graveyard, you can special summon one Exo-Sister Xyz monster from your extra deck using this face-up card you control as material. This is treated as an Xyz summon. So the purpose of the first effect is most of the Exo-Sister monsters, the decent ones, happen to be either Xyz or Link monsters. By being able to get into the various monsters, you're able to swarm the field and then go into those Xyz plays. The secondary ability happens to be reactive to whenever you or your opponent moves cards out of the graveyard, so it can be summoning them to the field, sending them back to the deck, sending them to your hand, or even banishing them. It's just any point you move them from the graveyard, you're able to just go into an Xyz monster and use this as part of the summoning requirement. Gunkan Suship Akashari is a level 4 fire attribute aqua type effect monster with 0 attack and 2000 defense. You can only use the second effect with this card's name once per turn. 1. This card's name becomes Gunkan Suship Shari while on the field or in the hand, deck, or graveyard. 2. You can reveal one other Gunkan Shari in your hand, special summon this card from your hand, then you can apply this effect. Special summon one Gunkan monster from your deck, except Gunkan Shari, but negate its effects. Then special summon from your extra deck one Xyz monster that mentions it by using it and this card as material. This is treated as an Xyz summon. The Xyz monsters that this card can help to bring out aren't particularly powerful, and they have like 2000 attack points. They're not that powerful. They can, for example, one lets you draw a card. This is a very gimmicky style of deck, and really it just treats itself as that specific name to just get a certain effect off. Rika Snow Princess is a level 4 water attribute plant type effect monster with 0 attack and defense. You can use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. During your main phase, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, you cannot special summon monsters while you control this monster except plant monsters. 2. When your opponent activates a monster effect and you control a Rika monster, as a quick effect, you can shuffle this card from your hand or graveyard into the deck and tribute one plant monster to negate that effect. The first effect of this card just lets you special summon this card, and that's fine, that's decent enough if you want to go into, say, a tribute for one of your bigger monsters. Secondary ability is where this card shines. By getting rid of this card and a different plant monster, you're just able to get rid of one of your opponent's monster effects, and bear in mind that you're shuffling them back into the deck rather than to the graveyard. That means you can probably search for them at some other point. That's how they synergize. Mathmech Circular is a level 4 light attribute Cyberse type effect monster with 1500 attack and defense. You can use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. You can send one Mathmech monster from your deck to the graveyard, except Mathmech Circular. Special summon this card from your hand. Also, you can only attack with one monster for the rest of this turn. 2. If another Mathmech monster is normal or special summoned to your field while you control this monster, you can add one Mathmech spell or trap card from your deck to your hand. The first effect of this card just lets you send a Mathmech from the deck to the graveyard. This is a special summon to bring this card out, but in placing it in the graveyard, that means you're probably going to revive that card in the future. Secondary ability, if another of those monsters is normal or special summoned, you just get to search for one of your spell or trap cards that happens to have Mathmech in the name. Crawler Soma is a level 6 Earth attribute insect type effect monster with 2000 attack and 2500 defense. You can only use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. You can target one face-up monster on your field, special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, change that monster to face-down defense position. Also, it cannot change its battle position for the rest of this turn. 2. During your main phase, you can reduce this card's level by 2 or 4, and if you do, special summon it from your hand, deck, and or graveyard in face-up and or face-down defense position any number of crawler monsters with different names whose total levels equal that reduction. This card is very key to how the archetype likes to work. First effect, by flipping a face-up monster to face-down defense position, all of the crawler monsters have flip effects, so you're resetting those effects without having to run more standardized support. And this is an instant special summon of this card. Decent considering that it's at level 6 and it doesn't really have any costs attached to it. Secondary ability, by simply reducing this by either 2 or 4, you're able to then get potentially another 2 crawler monsters to the field, and again, by having them face down, they're able to trigger off their effects. The limitations do mean that they can't change their battle positions for the rest of the turn, but I'm guessing the reason they do that is so they can't just all trigger off at the same time. It says here as part of the notes that its name is most likely derived from the soma, which is the large end of the nerve containing the nucleus. This term in turn is derived from the Greek word for body, which may explain the unusual way this card's name has been written, or with, for example, the small u would either be a very odd way of writing su, or possibly an approximation of a vowel sound somewhere between o and u, similar to how the Greek word uses an omega rather than the normal o of omicron. If meant to be read as Suma, the name could also come from the brain mapping software Suma, S-U-M-A. Stray Moki Moki is a level 1 light attribute fairy type effect monster with 300 attack and 100 defense. 1. While on the field or in the graveyard, this card is treated as a normal monster. Also, its name becomes Moki Moki. 2. You can discard this card and add one Moki Moki card from your deck to your hand, except Stray Moki Moki. Moki Moki itself is a very strange card. It's a normal monster with exactly the same stat lineup as this card, and it's just been used within Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. It was episode 23 by the Little Balowski. Its purpose was to kind of make everyone chilled out and to relax people into a deep sense of sleep. However, the more Moki Moki tried to do this to Jaden, the more revved up he got. The first effect of this simply treats this as a normal monster, whether this be in the field or in the graveyard, which is useful considering actually some of the support is directly linked to normal monster support and very weak leveled monsters support, if that as well. Secondary ability, just to discard this card, you can add any Moki Moki card from the deck to the hand. There are a couple of spell and trap cards, for example Moki Moki Smackdown, that actually forces your Moki Moki to have 3000 attack points, but you do have to have had both the Moki Moki face up on the field in attack position, and your other monster has to be a level 2 or lower fairy normal monster that has to have been destroyed in battle on that same turn to get that bonus. There is another one which is Human Wave Tactics, which allows you to then swarm the field with level 2 or lower monsters, but I would suggest we need more support before this becomes reasonable. Kurikara Avatar of the Immovable is a level 1 fire attribute fairy type effect monster with 1500 attack attack and defense. It cannot be normal summoned or set, must be special summoned from your hand by tributing all face-up monsters on the field that activated an effect in your opponent's monster zone this turn. You can only use the second effect with this card's name only once per turn. 1. It gains 1500 attack for each monster tributed for this card's special summon. 2. During your end phase, you can target one monster in your opponent's graveyard, special summon it to your field. I love the design of this card, and actually out of all the support, this is my personal favourite from it. The first effect simply happens if all your opponent's monsters have used their effects. You just get to wipe those cards out, and this has to be activated at some point, so I'm guessing it can be probably during nearer the end of their main phase 1, because you wouldn't want to necessarily use this at the start. They're probably going to be triggering off more of their effects, and it's a good way to try and clear off any of their disruptive monsters. First ability is to just gain 1500 attack points, even if you're just getting rid of one card. If this becomes a 3000 attack monster, if you can potentially get a field of about 3 others out, this becomes a 6000 attack level 1 monster. I don't think there are many examples that can do that either. Secondary effect is also very devastating. During the end phase, just able to target any monster in your opponent's graveyard and special summon it to your field. So the longer this card stays out, the more of a disadvantage this becomes to your opponent. Bear in mind that these effects can be triggered, only once per turn with the second effect, but I can understand why it would just be too strong if it was able to advance any more of that than to be able to use, for example, multiple of this card. It says here as the notes, Kurakara is a form of the Buddhist god Akala. It's a fire dragon coiled around an upright sword. Tendo is a god taking the form of a child. Ursa the Earth Channeler is a level 5 Earth attribute spellcaster type effect monster with 1500 defense points and 1850 attack points. This card is also always treated as a charmer card. You can use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. You can discard this card and one other Earth attribute monster. You cannot activate monster effects for the rest of this turn except Earth monsters. Also add one Earth monster with the same original type as either the discarded monster and 1850 or less attack from your deck to your hand. 2. When your Earth monster is destroyed by battle, you can special summon this card from your hand. Currently there is also the wind version of this card, so if those have been released, there will be the fire and the water versions coming out within the next couple of packs, and light and dark are usually kept to last, as has been the case for the other charmer monsters. The first effect itself, by discarding this and a different monster, you're just able to search for a different monster from your deck to your hand. It does have to be a specific typing, and it has to be within this 1850 or less attack points, so it can be very restrictive, but there are so many Earth attribute monsters, which is why I'd argue it's better than the Wind version, because Wind is typically the least supported of the attributes. Secondary ability, if an Earth monster is destroyed by battle, you just get to instantly special summon this card. It's not that great. It doesn't really have much of a threat. 1850 can be beaten by most level 4 monsters these days, if not directly with some type of equip card, because this doesn't have any protection to it. Ground Tusk Dragon is a level 8 Earth attribute dragon type effect monster with 1400 attack and 2400 defense. You can only use the first effect with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can target up to 2 other cards on the field, destroy them, and if you do, this card gains 600 attack for each card destroyed by this effect. Potentially this card can become a 2600 attack monster. That's why I'm guessing it's a level 8 monster. It does have to be normal or special summoned to trigger off this effect, which is nice because it does meet the requirements of Giant Rat, which when that's destroyed in battle lets you summon a monster which is an Earth attribute with 1500 or less attack. That meets this condition. You're instantly then able to pop 2 of your opponent's cards, be that spell trap or monsters, and you're getting constant levels of advantage. The nice thing is as well that the attack point gain is permanent. It's not until the end of this turn, so this provides you with that little bit more protection. Flame Buddy Erka the Fire Beast Tamer is a level 4 fire attribute warrior type effect monster with 1500 attack and 200 defense. You can only use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can target one face-up monster card in the spell and trap zone, special summon it to your field. 2. You can target one other face-up monster you control, equip it to this card as an equipped spell that gives it 500 attack points. I love the design of this card because just by normal or special summoning this card, you're then able to take a face-up monster and special summon it to your field. It is quite niche because those have to be in the spell and trap zone, so unless you're using things like crystal beasts, it might be tricky to do this. Or I think the artifacts also have this style of effect. The secondary ability just gives us an additional 500 attack points. It's fine, but I think it's very niche, and unless there are alternative ways that you can think of, please put those down in the comments, of getting your opponent's monsters to be in the spell and trap zones. Proper Gandrake is a level 3 Earth attribute psychic type effect monster with 500 attack and 2000 defense. Once per turn, you can declare one original type, be it a beast, insect, plant, or rock among monsters you control. This card becomes that type. 2. Apply these effects while this card's first effect is applied to this card in your monster zone. All face-up monsters on the field become this card's type. Your opponent cannot target monsters on the field with this card's type with the effects of monsters they control of the same type. This is quite a decent effect because it essentially turns everything into any of those 4 typings. Now, those types themselves aren't particularly supported. I'd argue probably the best amongst them is the rock type, because you do have some very devastating monsters alongside that. Beasts, insects, and plants are quite niche, and most players beyond the archetype-based players won't be running these styles. More commonly, things such as warriors, spellcasters, and dragons, and you do have, for example, Cyverse because of Vrains. Other than that, they're kind of not relied upon. The ability to match all of those monsters to a specific typing means you can shut down all of your opponent's effects. This is essentially a skill drain, but it's a one-sided skill drain. It targets your opponent's effects and it stops them from using anything. It's similar also to Destiny Hero Plasma in that respect. Hidden Jewel of the Hydrosphere, Katrin is a level 2 water attribute rock type effect monster with 500 attack and 1600 defense. You can use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. You can discard this card during your main phase. This turn, you can normal summon one earth or water monster in addition to your normal summon set. You can only gain this effect once per turn. 2. If you control an earth monster and a water monster while this card is in the graveyard, you can special summon this card but banish it when it leaves the field. The purpose of this card is just to be able to get you into more monsters on the field. It can be run in a water attribute or an earth attribute deck, or alternatively you can use it in a combination of the both. I don't think of many archetypes that rely on that style of effect. You have the ability to then bring this card out if you happen to have both of those monsters. It can be used as part of an Xyz play for a rank 2, it can be used for a link play, or it can be used as part of a tribute summon depending on what your options are. It says here as the notes, Katrin is a German spelling of the name Catherine, which is a complex history, but for here it likely means purity. Hiseki can also mean stone monument. Overeager Mr. and Mrs. Tanuki is a level 1 dark attribute fiend type effect monster with 0 attack and 1600 defense. You can only use the second effect of this card's name once per turn. 1. It cannot be tributed while in a monster zone, and 2. When you ritual summon, you can also use one monster in your etch deck for the ritual summon by sending it to the graveyard. This is a decent effect because most etch deck monsters will have a high enough level in which they can be used as pretty much the pure ritual cost for the monster you need. Depending on the style of deck you're running, it can mean that you don't rely on your etch deck too heavily, and it prevents you from having to waste from either your deck or your hand, minimizing those resource costs. It does say as part of the first effect it cannot be tributed while in the monster zone. Understandable why you wouldn't want this as well, otherwise it might be a bit too powerful to be able to combine the ritual costs. The notes say this card's name sounds like Mr. Attorney counting his chickens before they hatch, but it references raccoons and divining. Nightmare the Sin Psyker is a level 4 wind attribute psychic type effect monster with 1500 attack and defense. You can only use the first effect with this card's name only once per turn. 1. You contribute one monster, special summon one monster from your deck with the same original type, attribute, level, and attack and defense, but a different original name, or if you tributed a monster special summoned from the extra deck, you can special summon from your extra deck instead. This is a very niche style of effect, and depending on the style of deck you're running, it could be useful, but it could also be quite useless. It has to be very specific, it has to be the same type, attribute, level, and the attack and defense. Had that been maybe the same type and attribute, I could understand, but this requires everything outside of the name to be the same. There are probably some niche examples where this can be played, but for the most part, it's just too niche for use. Akuse here is likely a play on Malignancy and Evil Voice, and Seche might be a play on the heir or successor, but it just reads as Evil Awakening Master. Hydralander Orbit is a level 1 Dark Attribute Machine type effect monster with 0 attack and 1500 defense. You can only use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1 if you have 4 or more monsters in your graveyard and no monsters in your graveyard with the same name. You contribute this card, excavate cards from the top of your deck equal to the number of monsters in your graveyard. Then if you activate 2 or more monsters and no monsters with the same name, you can add one of them to your hand. Also place the rest on the top of the deck in any order. 2. You can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one monster in your graveyard, place it on the bottom of the deck. This seems like a bit too much hassle for any sort of requirements to meet the conditions. In the first place, having 4 or more monsters in your graveyard with different names, it could be difficult if you need to run multiple of the same name monsters, especially in archetype style of decks. Secondly, you simply get the bonus of excavating 2 or more monsters, and then you just add one of them to the hand. There are easier ways to search for monsters. Secondary ability, by banishing this card, you can then recover one of your monsters from the graveyard to the bottom of the deck. Unlikely for you to see it anytime soon, unless your deck is constantly shuffling itself. Vendred Scavenger is the level 8 Dark Attribute Zombie type Ritual effect monster with 2800 attack and 0 defense. You can ritual summon this card with any Vendred ritual spell. You can use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. During the main phase as a quick effect, you contribute 1 zombie monster. This card gains attack equal to the tributed monster's original attack until the end of this turn. 2. If you control Vendred Slayer and this card is in your graveyard, you can special summon this card but banish it when it leaves the field. So this is another one of the ritual monsters. This is the brand new one that they've introduced for the Vendreds. Its attack points are fine, 2800. The first effect just lets you get rid of one of your other zombie monsters, and it gains an attack equal to that monster's original attack. So this can be used during yours or your opponent's turn, and it can prevent your opponent from attacking into your monster. It would have been nice for it to have been activated at any point within your opponent's turn, not just during the main phase, because by using it during the main phase, this means your opponent's been warned to what you've done, and they're not likely to attack your monster unless they've got some type of guarantee, such as, for example, Honest. Secondary ability, if you just have the Vendred Slayer, which is the key first ritual monster on the field, and this is in the graveyard, you just get to special summon this, but at the cost that when it leaves the field, it then gets banished. Elemental Hero Shining Neos Wingman is a level 8 light attribute warrior type fusion effect monster with 3100 attack and 2500 defense. The fusion materials require an Elemental Hero Neos and a Wingman fusion monster, and it must be fusion summoned. You can use the first effect with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If this card is special summoned, you can destroy cards your opponent controls up to a number of different attributes on the field. 2. It gains 300 attack for each monster in your graveyard. Also, it cannot be destroyed by card effects. And 3. If this card destroys a monster by battle, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the destroyed monster's original attack points. This is meant to be like a Shining Wingman, a Neos version of that card. It has the exact same stat lineup with the 3100 attack. That's fine, it's decent, but I'd argue getting out the Wingman fusion monster first, it's quite difficult, unless of course you're using instant fusion to bring it out. The first effect is what makes it different in that it can wipe out cards your opponent has, up to the different attributes you've got on the field. Potentially that could be up to 6 cards if you've got a full field of attributes, and it can be spell, trap, or monsters that this effect targets. Secondary ability is the same as Shining Wingman or Shining Phoenix Enforcer, that it just gains 300 attack points for each monster in your graveyard. But the benefit of this is it's not specific to elemental heroes, it can be any monsters you've got in your graveyard. So it could be Neospatians, it could be absolutely nothing to do with any hero archetype archetype, it's just any monsters. And it has the benefit of not being destroyed by card effects. This opposes Wingman because Wingman has basically no protections to it. The idea is to get its attack points to a point where your opponent cannot swing over it. And it does remind me a little bit like an opposing version of Shining Phoenix Enforcer, because that has the ability to protect itself from being destroyed in battle. The third effect is the same as both of those in that if you happen to wipe out your opponent's monster by battle, you get to inflict that level of damage to your opponent from its attack points. That's fine, that's the typical Wingman style of effect. Tier element Chaotochorus is a level 5 Dark Attribute Aqua type fusion effect monster with 2300 attack and 1200 defense. Fusion materials are one tier elements monster and one aqua monster. You can use each effect among the first, second and third with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If this card is special summoned, you can take one tier elements card from your deck and either add it to your hand or send it to the graveyard. 2. You can target one monster you control, special summon one tier elements monster from your hand or graveyard, and if you do, send the targeted monster to the graveyard. And 3. If this card is sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can send the top 5 cards of your deck to the graveyard. The summoning on this card isn't too difficult. Tier elements are all aqua type monsters, so you can actually just fuse using 2 of those monsters together. First effect, when it's special summoned, means you can either take a tier elements, add it to your hand, or send it to the graveyard, so you can either choose to put it where you need it to summon it, or sending it to the graveyard helps trigger off its effect. Secondary ability replaces one of your monsters with a tier elements either from the hand or the graveyard to help trigger off the effect. And the third, if this happens to be sent to the graveyard as part of a card effect, you can then send the top 5 cards of the deck to the graveyard, hoping to trigger off additional effects. Tier element Kaleido Heart is a level 9 Dark Attribute Fiend type fusion effect monster. It's a level 9 with 3000 attack and defense, and the fusion materials are a tier elements Rhino Heart and 2 aqua monsters. It cannot be used as fusion material. You can use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If this card is special summoned, or if another aqua type monster is sent to your graveyard by card effect while this card is on the field. You can target one card your opponent controls, shuffle it into the deck. And 2. If this card is sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can special summon it, and if you do, send one tier elements card from your deck to the graveyard. This is the highest boss monster that they've got, and it's a bit underwhelming. The requirements on this isn't difficult, but you do need a named tier elements monster, Rhino Heart, and you need 2 aqua monsters this time. 3000 attack and defense, it's balanced, it's fine for a level 9. First effect lets you just shuffle one of your opponent's cards back into the deck. It's fine, but this can only be used once per turn. This would have been reason enough to maybe have it being able to use multiple times in the turn, because it's not that powerful an effect. Secondary ability, it just helps to trigger off the effects of your tier elements monsters. Gemini Lady Rose Diamond is a level 8 Earth Attribute Fairy type fusion effect monster with 2700 attack points and 2400 defense. Fusion materials are one Gemini monster and one fairy monster. 1. The first time a Gemini monster you control would be destroyed by card effect during each opponent's turn, it is not destroyed. 2. When your opponent activates a monster effect during your turn as a quick effect, you can banish one Gemini card from your graveyard, then target one face-up card your opponent controls and destroy it. This is the latest fusion monster for the Geminites. They do have quite a few of them. Fairy requirement isn't bad, considering that actually the Melodious cards were all fairy types used by Zuzu in the anime for Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5. The first effect just lets you have your monsters protected from card effects, but it's only during each of your opponent's turns, so it is very situational. During your turn, it doesn't provide that same level of protection. Secondary ability, just by banishing one of your Gemini cards, you're able to target a face-up card your opponent controls and destroy it. Benefit of this is you can wipe out any of their cards, be it spell, trap, or monsters. Problem is, it does have to rely on your opponent activating a monster effect during your turn. If your opponent doesn't have anything like that, then you can't use either of the effects that well. And I'd argue, even for a decent monster, it is probably one of the weaker and more situational ones. Also, it would have been better, since it's restricted as much as it is, to have just affected any of your opponent's cards rather than just the face-up ones. Cheerful Melfis is a level 4 Earth Attribute Beast type Synchro effect monster with 1500 attack and 1000 defense. The materials are one tuner and one or more non-tuner monsters. You can use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If this card is special summoned, you can target one face-up monster on the field, return it to the hand. 2. If your opponent normal or special summons a monster, or if this card is targeted for an attack by an opponent's monster, you can return this card to the extra deck, then you can special summon one Melfi Pixies monster from your extra deck. The summoning on this card isn't difficult, most of the monsters are level 2, so 2 of those monsters will meet this requirement. When this is special summoned, you just get to return one of your opponent's cards to the hand, so this is like a compulsory evacuation device effect. Secondary ability is whenever your opponent normal special summons a monster or declares an attack. By returning this to the extra deck, you just go for one of your Xyz monsters. That's a Melfi monster. Problem with this is some of them are heavily reliant on their Xyz materials, and this does not provide them with any of those. Punk Jam Dragon Drive is a level 8 Earth attribute psychic type synchro effect monster with 2700 attack and 2400 defense. The materials are a psychic tuner and one or more non-tuner monsters. You can use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If this card is special summoned with a punk card's effect or synchro summoned, you can pay 600 life points, take one level 3 psychic monster from your deck and either add it to your hand or send it to the graveyard. 2. If your opponent activates a card or effect in response to the activation of your punk card or effect while this card is in the graveyard, you can special summon this card. The summoning on this card isn't too difficult because most of the monsters you have within the archetype are psychic anyway. The first effect lets you just search for a level 3 psychic monster. I'm sure there's plenty of those. You can either send that to the graveyard if it has a graveyard style of effect, or if it's better to be normal summoned in your turn, you can add it to the hand. This secondary effect just lets you continually bring this card out. It's not a case of when it gets destroyed again that it gets banished, so it can constantly be activated whenever your opponent responds to one of your punk cards. Only concern is that it has to be in response to your cards, so you have a little bit less control. Gigantic Splite is a rank 2 Dart attribute Thunder type Xyz effect monster. It's got 1600 attack and defense, and it requires 2 level 2 monsters to summon it. For this card's Xyz summon, you can treat linked 2 monsters you control as level 2 materials. You can use the second effect with this card's name only once per turn. 1. This card's original attack becomes doubled while it has a fusion synchro Xyz and or link monster as material. 2. During your main phase, you can activate this effect. Neither player can special summon monsters for the rest of this turn except level, rank or link 2 monsters. Also detach one material from your monster, and if you do, special summon one level 2 monster from your deck. This is the boss monster for the Splite archetype. The summoning on this isn't difficult because all of your monsters will meet this criteria of being level 2, rank 2 or link 2. The first effect happens to be if it's summoned as part of having something as an Xyz material, its attack gets doubled. This instantly becomes a 3200 attack monster. You combine this with the one that has the honest style of effect. This will run over all of your opponent's monsters. Secondary ability actually is used to stun your opponent. Unless they're running level 2 style of decks, which there are very few to account for. I mean, you could argue the Maleseverus cards, which are a combination of the spoon, the fork and the knife, which is a sub-archetype used to summon number 96 Dark Mist, is an example. You do have the baby raccoons like Ponpoko, which are also level 2 monsters, but none of them have the strength to beat over this. Other than that, most of your cards won't reach these conditions. It restricts you and your opponent from special summoning anything, but again, since they're going to be running different levels, it's going to be worse of a burden for them. And you also get the benefit of additionally special summoning monsters to your field. And since you don't have to just have one of these cards, you can potentially go into multiple of these to shut down your opponent each and every turn. Subspecies King Asura O is a rank 3 Earth attribute warrior type Xyz effect monster. It has 2100 attack and 0 defense. It has 3 plus level 3 materials as its requirement, and you can use the third effect with this card's name only once per turn. 1. While this card has any number of materials, it can attack up to that many times during each battle phase. 2. At the start of the damage step, if this card battles, it gains 200 attack points. And 3. When another monster's effect is activated, as a quick effect, you can detach one material from this card, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that monster. 2100 attack points isn't that good, but considering it's for a rank 3 monster, I think it's fine. First effect can let your monster attack up to 3 times, and this doesn't have to be specific on monsters, this can be direct attacks as well. Secondary ability ability happens to be whenever you go into the damage step, it gains 200 attack points. So each time it does this, it's going to continually boost itself up. Potentially every turn you're going to be boosting it by 600 attack points because you keep going into the start of your damage step every time you go through the process. I believe that's correct. If it's not, please correct that in the comments down below. And the third effect, it's just to stop your opponent from using their monster effects. It's useful because, relatively speaking, if you do lose your Xyz materials, this is still a 2100 attack monster, and you will have boosted it at some point. So it's nothing, it's not going to be a problem, it's no sweat. This does remind me a bit of the Spirit version, which is also an Asura that had the ability to attack all of your opponent's monsters, but that was a spirit monster, and this is just an Xyz monster, and it's a warrior type. Splite Elf is a Link 2 fire attribute thunder type Link effect monster with 1400 attack points. The Link arrows are the bottom left and the bottom right, and it requires 2 monsters, including a level, rank, or Link 2 monster. You can use the second effect with this card's name only once per turn. It cannot be used as Link material the turn it is Link summoned. 1. Your opponent cannot target monsters this card points to with card effects. And 2. During the main phase, as a quick effect, you can target 1 level 2 monster in your graveyard or 1 rank or Link 2 monster instead if your opponent controls a monster, and special summon it. The point of this card is, with the first effect, this protects all of your monsters that are co-linked to this from monster effects. Of course, that just means this is a giant target for any of those cards to go after this card. Secondary ability just lets you help spam the board if your opponent has a monster on the field. It's a very easy condition to meet, and then that lets you go into further Xyz summoning or Link plays. Scareclaw Licked Heart is a Link 1 Dark Attribute Beast Warrior type Link effect monster with 500 attack points. The Link arrow is the middle left, and it requires a Scareclaw monster or 1 Visus Starfrost. If you Link summon this card, the material must be in your main monster zone. You can only use the second effect with this card's name only once per duel. 1. If this card is Link summoned to the extra monster zone, you can add 1 Primitive Planet Phobia from your deck to your hand. And 2. If you control Visus Starfrost, you can special summon this card from your graveyard. This card, the card that it actually searches for, reduces your opponent's, I think, defense points. So it's fine, but it is only a couple hundred per monster you have on the field. So it's not really going to do much. The secondary ability is just a reoccurring effect where you can bring it back to the field, hopefully for additional Link summoning plays, but it is under the condition that you have the Visus Starfrost already on the field. It says here that Licht is the German word for light. EN Engage Neospace is a normal spell card. You can only activate 1 card with this card's name per turn. You cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck the turn you activate this card, except fusion monsters. 1. Send 1 Neospatian monster and 1 Elemental Hero monster to the graveyard, 1 from your hand and 1 from your deck. Special summon 1 Neospatian monster or 1 level 5 or higher Elemental Hero monster from your deck. If it is Elemental Hero Neos, it gains 1000 attack points. And if you do, add 1 polymerization from your deck or graveyard to your hand. This is a decent effect because it does give you options. By sending the Neospatian and the Elemental Hero to the graveyard, you can then substitute that into either a Neospatian or a high level Elemental Hero. It doesn't have to be Neos, it could be Blade Edge, it could be Necroshade. There are a few out there that are higher than the level 4 criteria, but of course they want to incentivize the use of Neos, because that's why they've specifically added that 1000 attack point boost. And then by adding the polymerization, this helps to make the deck more consistent. Instant Contact is a normal spell card. You can only activate 1 card with this card's name per turn. 1. Pay 1000 life points, special summon 1 level 7 or lower Elemental Hero or Neospatian monster from your extra deck, ignoring its summoning conditions. But if Elemental Hero Neos is not on your field or in your graveyard, the summoned monster cannot attack, its effects are negated. Also return it to the extra deck during the end phase. I think this is a decent enough effect because you're basically bringing those cards out to be part of an additional fusion summon. The requirement on it being an Elemental Hero Neos style of card would help, but the problem is it still gets returned to the extra deck, so you need to use it as additional fusion steps. EN Wave is a continuous spell card. You can use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If your Elemental Hero monster is used as material for a fusion summon and sent to the graveyard or banished, you can special summon one Neospatian monster or one elemental hero Neos from your deck. 2. If a Neospatian monster and or elemental hero Neos is shuffled from your field and or graveyard into your deck and or extra deck, you can special summon one elemental hero monster from your graveyard. The main benefit of this card is with the first effect, your elemental heroes are going to be used as part of the fusions, and that means you're getting additional advantage by then summoning either the Neospatian or the hero Neos from the deck. Secondary ability reacts to if you've basically contact fused using Neospatian and Neos, and in which case you do the opposite, where you get to recover one of your elemental hero monsters from the graveyard and it goes straight to the field. Fusion Over is a quick play spell card with the effect you can only activate one card with this card's name per turn. 1. Target one face-up monster on the field. Reveal one elemental hero monster, Neospatian monster, or level 10 monster from your hand, deck, or extra deck, and if the targeted monster is used as fusion material this turn, it can be treated as the revealed monster. Also, if elemental hero Neos is on your field or in your graveyard, send the revealed monster to the graveyard. Otherwise, if you revealed a monster in your hand, shuffle it into the deck. The purpose of this is it's meant to act like a hero mask for high level monsters. It just helps you to go into your other fusions more quickly. Splite Starter is a quick play spell card. You can only activate one card with this card's name per turn. 1. You cannot special summon for the rest of this turn after this card resolves, except level, rank, or link 2 monsters. Also special summon one Splite monster from your deck, and if you do, you lose life points equal to its original attack. This is fine as an effect. You want to be getting as many of your monsters out as possible, and most of the Splite monsters don't have anything beyond 1400 as their attack base. This means you're going to be costing yourself very little unless it's nearer the end of the duel, and in most cases you will be able to activate this. Splite Gamma Burst is a quick play spell card. You can use only one effect among the first and second with this card's name per turn, and only once that turn. 1. All level, rank, or link 2 monsters currently on the field gain 1400 attack and defense until the end of this turn. 2. During your main phase, you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one level, rank, or link 2 monster you control. It gains 1400 attack until the end of your opponent's turn. This is a little bit like that honest style of effect. It's adding more attack points, and it's similar to Limited Removal in that most of the monsters will be getting the equivalent of double their attack points added. That means if you've got your entire field full, you can defeat your opponent within that turn. The secondary ability is also quite rewarding because just by banishing this, you just instantly grant one of your monsters the additional 1400 attack points. It might not be necessary to just take over one of your opponent's stronger monsters. Splint Smashes is a quick play spell card. You can only activate one card with this card's name per turn. 1. Banish one Springen's, Therian, or Splite card from your hand or graveyard, then activate one of these effects. Special summon one Springen's monster from your deck, special summon one Therian monster from your graveyard, and banish one level, rank, or link 2 monster you control, and one card your opponent controls. So this works depending on which of the archetypes you're running. If it happens to be Springen's, you get to summon another one from the deck. If it's Therian's, they return one from the graveyard, and if it happens to be for the Splite archetype, then you can just banish one of your opponent's cards. It does have to be one of yours as well, but I think that's fine. It does provide some flexibility. Branded Central Dogmatica is a continuous spell card. You can use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If you special summon one ritual monster with a spell effect and no other monsters, you can look at the extra deck and send one monster from it to the graveyard. And 2. If you special summon one fusion monster with a spell effect and no other monsters, you can target it until the end of this turn. It gains attack equal to its original attack. Also, it cannot attack except to attack opponent's attack position monsters. This is quite a devastating continuous spell card. First effect simply means that you can get rid of your opponent's extra deck monsters, and depending on how many times you can basically use it, you're constantly going to be wiping out your opponent's extra deck. The secondary effect lets your monsters then double their attack points, and even though it's against your opponent's attack position monsters, it will sustain quite a lot of damage to them. Scareclaw Straddle is a quick play spell card. You can only activate one card with this card's name per turn. Activate one of these effects. Target one Scareclaw monster or Vice Starfrost you control, and one face-up monster your opponent controls. Your monster gains attack and defense equal to that opponent's monster's attack or defense, whichever is higher. When a card or effect is activated that targets a Scareclaw monster and or Vice Starfrost you control, negate that effect. So the first effect is supposed to be a little bit like an honest, but it takes the higher value of whichever your opponent's monster has, whether that's the attack or defense. Useful for when your opponent is trying to attack into one of your monsters. Secondary ability happens to be effective if they're trying to just destroy your specific cards with any type of effect. Ruined Realm Pellerino is a field spell card with the effect you can only activate one card with this card's name per turn. You can only use the third effect with this card's name only once per turn. 1. When this card resolves, you can add one Tier Elements monster or one Visor Starfrost from your deck to the hand. 2. Fusion monsters and Tier Elements monsters you control gain 500 attack points. And 3. If a Tier Elements monster is returned from your field and or graveyard to the deck and or extra deck, you can target one card on the field, destroy it. So this is the field spell card for the Tier Element archetype. First effect just lets you search for a Tier Elements or Visor Starfrost from the deck to the hand. Most field spells do this. The second effect gives 500 attack points to Fusion and Tier Elements monsters. Again, most field spells will provide some sort of bonus. Some of them only go for 300. I'm guessing because the archetype itself isn't that powerful, that's why they've justified a 500 attack point boost. And the third effect is different because whenever those cards are returned from the field or graveyard to the deck and or extra deck, you're then able to target a card on the field and destroy it. So the more of those effects get triggered, the more likely you are to be able to wipe out your opponent's boards. Only concern is that it can only be used once per turn. I'd argue the effect isn't as powerful as it used to be, and it could probably be unlimited in terms of its effect. Flower Crown of the Vernalizer Fairy is a continuous spell card. With the effect, Earth monsters you control are also treated as Vernalizer Fairy monsters. 2. Once per turn, if a Vernalizer Fairy monster in your hand would discard itself and one other card to activate its effect, it can discard only itself instead. This makes sense as to why the archetype is named and treated as it is. For the first part, any Earth monsters you control are just treated as that same archetype. They become one and the same, so you're merging the whole archetype together. That lets all of their effects, which typically only work on the Vernalizer Fairy monsters, work on all of your Earth monsters. Secondary ability reduces the discard cost to only the card activating its effect itself, limiting the discards you have from your hand and limiting the risk of disadvantages. Scatter Fusion is a continuous spell card. You can only use the first effect with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If your opponent controls a monster, you can activate this effect. You cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of this turn, except Gemini monsters. Also fusion summon one non-rock Gemini fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your deck as fusion material and target it with this card. When this card leaves the field, destroy that target. The benefit of this card is that it fusion summons using cards from your deck. That means you're not wasting cards that are either in the graveyard or in the hand, which need to be used for other purposes. Melfi Staring Contest is a continuous spell card. You can only use the first effect with this card's name only once per turn. 1. You can reveal one beast monster in your hand, add one Melfi monster with a different name from your deck or graveyard to your hand, and if you do, place the revealed monster on the bottom of the deck. 2. At the start of your opponent's battle phase, you can reveal any number of Melfi monsters in your hand, and they will remain revealed until the end of the battle phase. And 3. Monsters your opponent controls lose attack equal to the combined attack and defense of all monsters currently revealed by this card's second effect. This is a very powerful effect. The first effect lets you substitute the Melfi monsters you have, be it if you've got different beast types that aren't really affected by this, then you can just swap those out for Melfis, and that's determined by your situation if you feel that the Melfi monsters are going to provide you with more advantages. Second effect, by just revealing you just have to reveal any of the Melfi monsters you have in your hand, but they do have to be remaining revealed until the end of the battle phase, and that also means that your opponent kind of sees what type of strategy you're running. But the third effect is the devastating one. They lose attack points equal to the combined attack and defense of all monsters currently revealed by this effect. That is going to wipe out probably most of their attack points. There will be very few monsters that won't be really affected by this, and even those that aren't, they are probably going to be running scared from this effect. I would not sleep on this card, definitely for the Melfi archetype. It's needing to be run in multiple copies, maybe 2, maybe 3. I'll have to see to playtest that to determine why you would run to that extent. Ravenous Vendread is a ritual spell card. This card can be used to ritual summon any Vendred ritual monster. You can only activate one card with this card's name per turn. 1. Special summon one Vendred monster from your hand, deck, or graveyard in face down defense position, except Vendred Scavenger. Then ritual summon one Vendred ritual monster from your hand or graveyard by attributing monsters whose total levels equal or exceed the level of the ritual monsters you ritual summon, including the summoned monster. The nice thing about this card is that that you're just able to ritual summon a particular monster. It does have to be face down, but it can be from the deck, the graveyard, or the hand. And then after that, you perform a secondary ritual summon by using that ritual monster from the hand or graveyard, and that means you're able to get some of your stronger ones without having to go into too many resources. Punk Jam Extreme Session is a field spell card. You can only use the second effect with this card's name up to twice per turn. Once per turn, you can banish one punk card from your graveyard, special summon one punk monster from your hand. 2. If your life points are paid to activate the effect of psychic monsters you control, you can draw one card. The first effect just lets you cycle through your monsters and lets you special summon from the hand, providing you field advantage. Second ability, if you happen to pay life points to use the psychic monsters effects, which have been going since the introduction of psychic monsters back in Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, you get to draw additional cards. That helps to thin your deck. It also means you search for some of your stronger cards more quickly. Rika Arrival is a field spell card. You can only use the first effect with this card's name per turn. 1. If you control a Rika monster, you can set one Rika spell or trap card directly from your deck to your spell and trap zone. Also, you cannot special summon monsters for the rest of this turn except plant monsters. 2. Once per turn, if you attribute a plant monster you control to activate a Rika card's effect, you contribute one face-up monster your opponent controls, even though you do not control it. I love the design of this card. The first effect just lets you search any of your Rika spell or trap cards from the deck and put it straight in the spell and trap zone. They can't be activated during that turn, but then again, that's fine. There isn't really too much of a limitation. If that's a trap card, it's a bit limited. If it's a spell card, it can still be activated. Secondary ability lets you get rid of one of your opponent's monsters to then activate the Rika card's effect. Essentially, this kaijus your opponent's cards without you having to run specific kaijus in your deck. Ultimate Slay is a normal spell card. Your opponent cannot activate monsters' effects in response to the activation of this card. 1. Send one monster from your extra deck to the graveyard, then target one monster your opponent controls with the same monster card type, Fusion, Synchro, Xyz, Pendulum, or Link. Shuffle it into the deck. The benefit of this card is it cannot be disrupted by your opponent's monster effects by being activated, but it does come at the cost of having to be a specific monster of a specific typing. So whilst it does shuffle it back into the deck, you are going to have to mismatch your extra deck completely and sacrifice that to cover all bases. So for example, if you're facing off against a deck that's heavily pendulum based, lots of players don't play that many pendulum monsters. I think it was a lot to do with bad taste of, how you used to be able to just mass summon things. They could reoccur very quickly, and it just left people with a sour taste in their mouths. So potentially, if they're running that, you're going to need pendulum monsters. You also have to consider that it will take away from the standards of your deck, because for example, if you're running elemental heroes, you need mostly fusions, but then you're going to need to run at least 1 or 2 synchros, 1 or 2 Xyz, 1 or 2 pendulums, and 1 or 2 links to cater towards countering all of your opponent's cards. It says here that the written name is Arrowhead of the Moon Goddess. The Furigana says it should be read as Ultimate Slay, which seems to be a portmanteau, which is a combination of ultimate, pronounced in Japanese, and Artemis, the Moon Goddess. It's one of these counter style of cards that they have introduced for quite a few years. I mean, you have things like Crossout Designator, you've got Called by the Grave, you have Grisal Prison, some very weird one, Dimension Barrier, for example. All of these counter various different cards, but they're usually quite specific to figure out against certain ones. Disadvantage of this is usually when these style of cards do come out, other newer style of cards come out, which means that they kind of get outplayed because these don't factor in those new designs of cards. Ultimate Free Radio Jamming is a continuous spell card with the effect 1. If a monster battles with any monster on the field has 1000 or more attack points, during damage calculation, the attack of each face-up monster currently on the field becomes what it would have been if it lost 1000 attack for every 1000 attack it has. Also, its defense becomes what it would be if it lost 1000 defense for every 1000 defense it has. If this card is destroyed until the end of this turn, the attack of each face-up monster currently on the field becomes what it would be if it lost 1000 attack for every 1000 attack it has. Also, its defense becomes what it would be if it lost 1000 defense for every 1000 defense it has. The wording on this card is just bizarre. It's an absolute tongue twister. I understand the concept, so if your monsters have 1000 or more attack points, they keep losing 1000 attack points until they're basically 900 attack points or lower. It's useful if your monsters have 900 attack or lower because it's just your opponent's cards that are going to be affected by this. Trouble being is you're going to have to run a very specific style of weak deck to be able to counter this, and since it's a continuous spell card, your opponent is probably going to just try and get rid of this, and this can't really have any protection to itself. Potentially you could be running certain cards. I think there is one of those, Uranus one, that has the ability to protect your continuous spell and trap cards. If you run that with this, that can actually protect itself as well from being destroyed in battle, whilst you've got those cards face up. That's an option to use. It will lose quite a few attack points in the process, and it's a very gimmicky strategy, but I love the design of these, and I definitely think Konami needs to be working on more of them. If you know of any strategy you can use and apply with this, I'd love to hear those in the comments down below. Favorite Contact is a normal trap card with the effect you can only activate one card with this card's name once per turn. 1. Special summon one fusion monster from your extra deck that mentions a hero monster as material, ignoring its summoning conditions. By placing fusion materials mentioned on it from your hand, field, graveyard, and or your face-up banished cards on the bottom of your deck in any order, and if you place elemental hero Neos, the summon monster cannot be returned to the extra deck. I love the design of this card. It's perfect for what they need. For starters, this affects most areas of your field, so the hand, the field, the graveyard, or banished. By sending those back to the bottom of the deck, you can instantly recover those, and instead of running specific types of support, it lets you summon monsters without having to achieve their summoning conditions, which is always a more broken way of bringing those cards out. And if you happen to have used it Neos, so for the contact fusion style of it, they can't be returned to the extra deck, which is often the problems with most of the hero monsters that are fused with Neos. Most of them just go back to the extra deck, except for some of the newer ones, and this additional support will provide that to the older versions. Breaking Branded is a normal trap card with the effect you can only activate one card with this card's name once per turn. 1. Tribute one fusion monster, then target 2 non-fusion monsters that are banished and or in either graveyard. Special summon one of them to each field, or if you tributed a fusion monster that mentions Fallen of Albaz as material, you can special summon both to your field in defense position instead. This is a particularly nasty card to walk into. You're just able to steal both of your opponent's monsters if you happen to have tributed the fusion monster with Fallen of Albaz as a material. Alternatively, you can give yourself the better of the two monsters that are chosen from your opponent's banished or graveyards, and give your opponent the worst version. Tier Elements Meta Noise is a normal trap card. You can only use one effect among the first and second with this card's name per turn, and only once that turn. 1. If you control a Tier Elements monster or Visor Starfrost, target one face-up monster your opponent controls, change it to face-down defense position, then send one Tier Elements monster from your deck to the graveyard. 2. If this card is sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can target one Tier Elements monster in your graveyard, add it to your hand. So the first part of the effect lets you Book of Moon your opponent's monster if you happen to have a Tier Elements or Visor Starfrost. You then get to send a Tier Elements from the deck to the graveyard, and then those get to trigger off their effects. Secondary ability happens to be if this gets sent to the graveyard and destroyed, you get to recover one of your Tier Elements monsters. It just helps to cycle through your cards. Tier Elements Salic is a continuous trap card with the effect you can only use each effect among the first and second effects with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If you control a Tier Elements monster or Visor Starfrost, you can target one effect monster your opponent controls, negate its effects, then send one monster you control to the graveyard. 2. If this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can add one Tier Elements monster from your deck to the hand. So the first effect is quite decent because it just shuts down your opponent's effects, and it can be responded to during your opponent's turn since it's a continuous trap card. It does have to send a monster you control to the graveyard, but it's a reasonable price to pay. Secondary ability, if this is destroyed by any means, then you're able to just add a Tier Elements from the deck to hand. Since it has no real requirement, it can be any monster you need. Tier Elements Climb is a counter trap card. You can only use one effect among the first and second with this card's name per turn, and only once that turn. 1. When a spell or trap card or monster effect is activated while you control a Tier Elements monster or Visor Starfrost, negate the activation, and if you do, shuffle that card into the deck, then send one monster from your hand to the graveyard. 2. If this card is sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can target one of your banished Tier Elements monsters, add it to your hand. So the first effect is a bit like a Solemn Judgment in that it just shuffles, it negates an effect, be it spell, trap, or monster, and if you do, shuffle a card back into the deck, and then you get to send the monster from your hand to the graveyard, which means you can then trigger off the Tear Elements effect. Secondary ability, if this is sent to the graveyard, you just get to recover one of your Tear Elements that happens to be banished. Calendar Rotation of the Vernalizer Fairy is a normal trap card. You can use each effect among the first and second with this card's name only once per turn. 1. Target one Vernalizer Fairy monster in your graveyard, either add it to your hand or special summon it. 2. During your opponent's turn, if you have no cards in your hand, except the turn this card was sent to the graveyard, you can banish this card from your graveyard, special summon as many Vernalizer Fairy monsters with different names as possible from your graveyard, but return them to the hand during the end phase. For the first effect, it just simply lets you either add it to the hand or special summon, so it's just about having more resources. Secondary ability lets you banish this card to bring out as many of your Vernalizer Fairy monsters. They do have to go to the hand at the end phase, but I suppose you can use them for tributes or for some of their effects, considering that those effects aren't going to be negated. It's a good way of kind of swarming the field and disrupting your opponent, because they might not know how to deal with these cards. Vernalizer Fairy and Flower Buds is a normal trap card. You can only activate one card with this card's name per turn. 1. Target one face-up cards your opponent controls up to the number of Earth monsters you control with different names special summoned from the graveyard. Return Earth monsters you control to the hand equal to the number of targets, and if you do, return the targeted cards to the hand. This is like a mass version of compulsory evacuation device. It can be a bit specific because it can only target the cards that you've special summoned from the graveyard, so if you haven't used that often, you're not going to get much of an effect from it. It's a good way of wiping out your opponent's cards, setting them back to the hand. It's not overly broken, but it does allow you to potentially OTK because it just blanks out your opponent's field if they're running very few cards on the field. Exosister Litanania is a normal trap card. You can only activate a card with this card's name once per turn. 1. If all monsters you control are Exosister monsters, minimum 1, you can pay 800 life points, then target one card your opponent controls, or in their graveyard, banish it. Then you can apply one of these effects. Immediately after this effect resolves, Xyz summon one Exosister Xyz monster using monsters you control. If you Xyz summoned previously this turn, banish one card your opponent controls. This card provides you with an option. If you've already Xyz summoned, you just get to banish anything your opponent has, so that's spell, trap, or monsters. Or if you need the Xyz monster to begin with, you just get to do that on your opponent's turn. Amaze Attraction Thrill Train is a normal trap card. You can only use the second effect of this card's name once per turn. 1. Target one amazement monster you control or one face-up monster your opponent controls. Equip this card to it. 2. You can activate the following effect based on which player controls the equipped monster. You change the equipped monster's battle position, and if you do, your opponent chooses one attraction trap in your graveyard for you to set to your field. Your opponent banish the equipped monster until the end phase. So the Amaze Attraction archetype works in having monsters and trap cards. The traps act as equipped spells that basically activate and equip either to yours or your opponent's monsters, and each will have different effects. The first one in this case happens to change the battle position of your monster, and then you're able to recover one of your attraction trap cards and set it to your field. If it's your opponent, it acts like an interdimensional matter transporter and just banishes your opponent's monster. It's a good way of clearing the field if you want to do some direct damage. Sundered from Overroot is a normal trap card. You can only activate one card with this card's name per turn. 1. Target one card your opponent controls and one card in their graveyard. Send that card on the field to the graveyard, and if you do, set that card in their graveyard to their field. The idea of this is you're basically switching a card they have in their graveyard with something they control, hopefully getting out a weaker version. It does have the disadvantage if it is face down already, means you don't know whether the card they've got set is bait or whether the card that you're actually recovering might be more useful than you like to think. Dragon King's Aura is a counter trap card. You can only activate one card with this card's name per turn. 1. When your opponent activates a monster effect on the field, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that monster. Then you can banish one monster from your hand, and if you do, special summon the monster destroyed by this effect and sent to the graveyard to your field, but its effects are negated. This is a decent effect because this instantly negates the activation of your opponent's monster and destroys it. Then you have the potential to banish a monster from your hand and then special summon the monster that's been destroyed by the effect. Potentially potentially you might get something that is very powerful that they own, whereas you might be banishing something you just don't need for that time. It's a decent way of generic form of countering your opponent, and it's something that your opponent really can't respond too heavily against. And the final card is Terrible Dust Nades. This is a normal trap card. You can only activate one card with this card's name per turn. 1. Target any number of set cards in your spell and trap zone. Return both this card and as many of those set cards as possible to the hand. Then you can set spell or trap cards from your hand equal to the number of cards returned to your hand. This is potentially a good way of kind of protecting your cards if your opponent is trying to mass destroy your cards, but other than that, it is a bit gimmicky. I know you've got variations of things such as Giant Trunade and Dust Tornado. It's supposed to be a combination of both, but I don't think it's as effective as, for example, Heavy Storm Duster or even Hey Trunade. All of those are retrained versions that are supposed to be a little bit limited in certain respects and more powerful than others. Enough so that they're not ban worthy, but good enough to be used in the metagame. What do you guys think of the various cards that have been introduced? Personally, I love them. I think this is amazing variety, and even the archetype supports. I love the Vernalizer fairies. I have always been a fan of Earth attributes anyway. I'd love to hear what your favourite cards and the worst cards you've got within the comments section down below, and I'll get back to responding to as many of those as I can. In the meantime, I'd really appreciate if you'd watch the video in the end screen here. It will have some more information to do with some other videos relating to Yu-Gi-Oh content.